The engine is always so loud. Yep, it's live. We live. With the mic. There we go. The mic. Okay. All right. Anybody that's watching from home, just in the comments, or anybody that's watching online in the comments on the stream, just go ahead and let us know how the audio sound. Trying to talk into both of these mics at the same time. You gonna do? Okay. All right, Terry gonna check to see how the audio sound. All right, Food Truck Tuesdays. This is the second week. We gonna make sure that the audio is sounding good, sounding right. We got anybody that's watching this, please feel free to come out. We got multiple pamphlets down here. These pamphlets is free. History of the Winnebago Boone Integrity Task Force. Business cards is down here. We got members of the May 30th Alliance organization down here. So please come out. I think what we're gonna start today, reading. We're gonna read a few excerpts out of the history of the Winnebago Boone Integrity Task Force. We're gonna just make sure we got the audio sounding right on the stream though. All right. Good? All right, we good. Okay. First here, let's do this too. Okay. This is a picture of Denzel Duvant. So this on the camera here. We put it up here too. Denzel Duvant, who was assaulted at the hands of the Rockford Police Department on January 5th, 2021 while he was handcuffed. This is Denzel Duvant, beat by multiple members of the Rockford Police Department January 5th, 2021 while he was handcuffed. The excuse that they gave for assaulting and beating him was that he resisted arrest and tried to fight a police officer. The charges of resisting arrest have been dropped, and the charges of assault to a police officer has been dropped. But the officers who beat him for supposedly resisting arrest, the officers who beat him for supposedly aggravated assaulting a police officer, now that those charges have been dropped, they have not been charged for the things that they did to Denzel Duvant or reprimanded for the things that they did to Denzel Duvant. And even though this is one man's face, there's plenty of people who have lived in this community whose loved ones' faces have looked like this. There's plenty of people who have lived in this community who have dealt with these type of issues on a regular basis. And for too long, issues like these have went, hey, how you doing? For too long, issues like these have went unspoken in this city. For too long, issues like these have been relegated in this city to being talked about as if they happen in a faraway land, like they happen in Ferguson, but they don't happen on Fairgrounds. Like they happen in LA, but they don't happen on Kilburn. Like they happen in Birmingham, Alabama, but they don't happen in the different neighborhoods in Rockford, Illinois on a regular basis. And so if we are down here at Food Truck Tuesdays at Nicholas Conservatory, we'll be down here every Tuesday just to remind people as they're going on about their day and getting churros and getting tacos that this is what the police department of this city does. This is not a one-off thing. We have a pamphlet here detailing multiple people who have been murdered at the hands of the Rockford Police Department, multiple people who have died in the custody of the Winnebago County Jail, and not one time in any in-custody deaths, not one time in any police shooting has any officer ever been found to be unjustified. There's never been an officer that has been reprimanded or fired or went to court or had any type of trial or charges brought on them for the murders or for the shootings which have taken place in this city. And let me go through a few dates for people, just so that way people don't think this is a one-off thing. Mark Barmore, murdered August 24th, 2009 by the Rockford Police Department. The officers were found justified and went back to work. Michael Sago Jr., murdered October 1st, 2011 by an off-duty Winnebago County Sheriff deputy. That murder was found justified, and that deputy went back to work and was given a reward for the murder of Michael Sago Jr., a 16-year-old who was shot in the back, and the final bullet was put into him as he crawled away. Philip Johnson, who was murdered January 28th, 2012 by the Rockford Police Department. The officers who murdered Philip Johnson were found justified and went back to work. Demetrius Bennett, who was murdered in November 1st, 2012. The officers who murdered Demetrius Bennett were found justified and went back to work. Eddie Patterson, who was murdered in November 5th, 2017. The murder of Eddie Patterson was found to be justified. Kerry Blake was murdered December 30th, 2018 by the Rockford Police Department. His murder was found to be justified, and the officer that murdered him went back to work. Eugene Washington, who died in the custody of the Winnebago County Jail on October 28, 2019, and whose family was given no answers. All the correctional officers in the Winnebago County Jail was found justified and was found to have done no wrongdoing, even though the family was given no answers to the reason that Geno Washington died. Joseph McCormick, who died December 1st, 2019, in the custody of the Winnebago County Jail, whose family said that they had spoke to him the day before and they did not believe him to be suicidal, and who was found to have was found to be hung himself in his jail. The COs who should have been able to be on watch to make sure that nobody had the ability to commit suicide, none of them were reprimanded or had any penalties and were justified, and no wrongdoing was found to have been done, and they all went back to work. Mikey Guzman, who was hit by a South Beloit police cruiser August 23rd, 2020 and killed. The officer who ran him down with a police cruiser was found to be justified and was found to have done no wrongdoing, and he went back to work to drive around in a police cruiser again. And then Tyrus Jones was shot October 2nd, 2020, and the officer who shot Tyrus Jones while he was unarmed and gunned him down in the streets went back to work in December of 2020. And by the time we get to January 2021, the officer who shot Tyrus Jones in the back while he was running away was responsible for this happening to Denzel Duvant. Was responsible for this happening to Denzel Duvant. This is the work of the Rockford Police Department. This is the work of the Rockford Police Department. Assaulting people while they're handcuffed, beating people while they're handcuffed, unarmed and handcuffed, beating the streets. This is a picture. People see this picture and ask us all the time if this man is still alive. People see this picture and ask us all the time how long ago this man was murdered, how long ago this man was killed. This didn't happen 10 years ago. This didn't happen 5 years ago or 3 years ago or 2 years ago. This happened January 5th, 2021, and it didn't happen in LA or in Watts or in Birmingham or in Ferguson. It happened over in Fairgrounds in the middle of the night, and the officers who did it, the officers who beat this man while he was handcuffed, were not held accountable, went back to work to assault and beat people at whim. Denzel Duvant, January 5th, 2021. A bit warmer today. Yeah, I don't think I got a Jose. This is Faustin Guay-Tigo. Faustin Guay-Tigo, murdered by the Winnebago County Sheriff deputies inside of his home on April 10th, 2021. April 10th, 2021. Murdered inside of his home by the Winnebago County Sheriff deputies. This video can be found on the May 30th Alliance page. It's pinned to the top. It can be found on the Facebook page or the Twitter page or the Instagram page. And you can see the videos of the Winnebago County Sheriff deputies coming inside of this man's home like a hit squad and murdering this man inside of what should be the safety of his own home. Faustin Guay-Tigo, murdered by the Winnebago County Sheriff deputies. Murdered by the Winnebago County Sheriff deputies. Faustin Guay-Tigo, April 10th, 2021. And unfortunately, just like we just went through the list of names in that pamphlet, there has never been any officer found to not be justified in the murdering of innocent, unarmed people in the streets. Again, innocent until proven guilty, because these people who have been murdered in their homes have not had the chance to stand a fair trial, have not had the chance to be judged by a jury of their peers. The only trial and judge and jury that they have interacted with were the police officers who decided to take judge, jury, and executioner into their own hands and murder these people in the streets. Faustin Guaitigo killed inside of his home. No more castle doctrine in America. Murdered inside of his own home. The last bullet that went inside of this man as he laid on the ground. And then after he laid on the ground bleeding, they handcuffed him and told him to stop resisting arrest as he laid on the ground bleeding to death, dying. Very next day, Jose Gonzalez Jr. shot while running away by the Rockford Police Department. Very next day. During the late morning on August 24th, 2009, a woman called the Rockford Police Department alleging that Mark Anthony Barmore had threatened to slash her throat the previous night. According to dispatch records, the woman stated that Barmore was sleeping inside and that she would wait outside for police. Units were dispatched and arrived on the scene between 10 to 15 minutes after the initial call, but did not apprehend Barmore, reporting that he fled out the back door of the residence. A few minutes later, a Rockford police dispatcher notified patrol units that a person called Skip, fitting the description of the individual for whom police were looking, was seen walking on the Jefferson Street Bridge on Rockford's west side. Dispatch notified units that Skip had apparently pulled a knife out on a girl. Officers North and Poole were assigned to the squad wagon for Rockford's west side. The officers were dispatched to the Jefferson Street Bridge. 5 minutes after officers North and Poole were assigned to respond to the Jefferson Bridge, dispatch provided more detailed information about the person for whom they were searching, including his name, a more complete physical description, and that Barmore was wanted on a warrant and might still be armed with a knife. A few minutes after receiving this information, officers North and Poole notified dispatch that they had Barmore in sight in the Winnebago Woodlawn area. The evidence shows that officers North and Poole saw Barmore standing outside the House of Grace Church talking with a group of people. According to several of these individuals, Barmore, who came to the church occasionally, was relating trouble he was having, including an altercation with the girl where he almost had to slit her throat, resulting in the police coming after him. Church members and officials were encouraging him to stay out of trouble and become involved in a boxing group the church was soon to begin. When Barmore saw officers North and Poole and realized they were looking for him, he ran from the group and into the church, slipping in behind a church official who was entering the church. Officer Poole got out of the police vehicle and pursued Barmore, while Officer North drove the vehicle to the side of the building to prevent Barmore from fleeing through the side doors of the church. The doors to the church were locked, but Officer Poole was led into the church by a church official. Two women in the church told Officer Poole that the man had gone downstairs and that there were children in the basement. A young man held the door open for Officer North and also told him that Barmore had gone downstairs. Officer North went downstairs with Officer Poole right behind him. According to Officer North's statement to RPD, he drew his service weapon just before entering the daycare room at the bottom of the basement stairs. Officer Poole, according to his statement, had drawn his weapon while in the hallway of the church upstairs. When officers North and Poole entered the daycare room in the basement, they immediately saw somewhere between 8 and 15 about preschool-aged children in their estimation, as well as about 2 adults. At least one child in the daycare classroom in the basement saw Barmore enter the classroom and run past the counter through a small kitchen area into what was known as the boiler room or closet. Officer North was the first one to enter the daycare room in the basement and asked, "Where did he go?" or words to that effect. One or more children and possibly the daycare teacher stated that he had gone into the closet. Sheila Brown, a pastor of the House of Grace Church, proprietor of the daycare, had followed the officers into the basement. Seeing officers' guns drawn, she and the daycare teacher already in the room gathered the children into the corner of the classroom opposite the boiler room and shielded the kids with their bodies. Upon being told that Barmore had entered the boiler room, Officer North focused his attention on the boiler room door, which had a small window in the center at about Officer North's eye level. Because it was dark inside the room, Officer North activated his gun-mounted flashlight. Officer Poole entered the basement during this time and was right behind Officer North as Officer North immediately began to try to open the boiler room door. Officers North and Poole stated that they attempted to push open the boiler room door, but that Barmore was pushing the door back, quote-unquote, attempting to barricade the door closed, in the words of Officer Poole. Witness and officer statements report that the officers yelled at Barmore to come out of the closet, get down, and to put his hands up. Officers North and Poole were able to open the door a few inches at first, and then approximately 12 inches, all while Barmore was attempting to keep the door closed. Barmore reached out and grabbed a long white object, later determined to be a metal ballast cover, at which point officers North and Poole were able to force the door open, pushing Barmore back into the boiler room and causing him to drop the ballast cover. While the officers' statements are ambiguous on this point, it appears that the officers may actually have pursued Barmore into the boiler room. The boiler room, which was 15 feet wide by approximately 33 feet long, was not illuminated except by Officer North's gun-mounted flashlight and any light reaching it from the daycare classroom. According to officer statements, Officer North then stepped back to, quote, extend the distance between himself and Barmore. Officer Poole held his pistol, quote, in a close quarters combat style hold, end quote, close to his chest and remained either inside or at the doorway of the boiler room, very close to Barmore. According to the officer's statements, the reason for maintaining this close proximity to Barmore was to keep Barmore from retreating back into the boiler room from where he might, quote unquote, get away and take hostages or otherwise cause harm. Officers Poole states that Barmore immediately, quote, lunged for his weapon with, quote, both hands. In either event, both officers report that very quickly, both Officer Poole and Barmore had both hands on Officer Poole's gun. Barmore with both hands on the barrel of the gun and Officer Poole with one hand on the gun grip and one hand over Barmore's hand. Officer Poole and Barmore struggled over the gun while, quote, within inches of each other and with the gun at chest level. Officer Poole reported that he believed that Barmore was struggling to disarm him and that if Barmore were to succeed, Barmore might use the weapon against one of the officers. Officer Poole reported that when he was able to push the barrel of the weapon towards Barmore, he pulled the trigger and saw the bullet strike Barmore in the neck. Officer Poole reported that after being shot, Barmore moved back and then forward again, maintaining his hold on the gun. Officer Poole and Barmore continued to struggle, falling against the sink with their backs to Officer North. Officer Poole reported that he heard Officer North discharge his weapon, at which point he was able to pull his gun away from Barmore. Officer Poole reported that when he saw Barmore fall, quote unquote, against the sink and then fall to the floor, landing on his back. Officer Poole reported that Officer North then broadcast over the police radio a call for officer assistance and medical attention for Barmore. At this point, according to Officer Poole, he yelled to the daycare teachers to take the children from the room. Officer North reported that once he saw Officer Poole and Barmore were struggling over Officer Poole's gun, he, quote, instantly realized this had now turned into a life or death situation for Officer Poole, myself, and possibly the children in the room if Barmore was allowed to get Officer Poole's pistol, end quote. Officer North reported that as he waited for Officer Poole to get out of his line of fire, he heard Officer Poole's gun discharge. Officer North reported that he did not know who had fired the gun, who had been hit, or who was in control of the gun. Officer North reported that as Barmore's right rear side faced him, he aimed at Barmore's back and fired what he believed to be 3 or 4 rounds, striking Barmore's back. Officer North reports that Barmore fell to the floor, landing on his back, and that water from a pipe near the sink began spraying. At this point, according to Officer North, there was now a lot of screaming from the children, who were now huddled in the far northeast corner of the room with the adults. As additional officers arrived on the scene, Officers North and Poole, quote, began yelling for the adult daycare workers to get the children out of there, end quote. They didn't wait to get the children out of there before they started shooting, though. I've been trying to wait to say nothing until we finish this. Officer Hansel, one of the first officers arriving on the scene, placed handcuffs on Barmore without moving him. So then that gets us back again to this idea of they shoot somebody, and then after they've shot this person and killed them, and they're laying there dying, they handcuff them. Which just lets you know that they don't see these people as human beings. They have no empathy towards these people. They're not coming into this situation with any care for these people that they're murdering. They're coming into these situations and seeing these people as nothing but as a threat to be neutralized, not a human being to be saved, or a human being to be helped. Because if that was the case, after the one officer shot him in the neck, and then the other police officer admittedly shot him in the back 4 times, and they're doing all of these things. This is taking place within minutes in front of children inside of a church. There's no de-escalation tactics. There's no trying to have a conversation or talk this person down, or even taking the time to make sure that the innocent people who are in the proximity of these events going on, to at least give them time to be exited out of the building. And again, all of these things are happening in a church. I lost my part. Officer Hansel, one of the first officers arriving on the scene, placed handcuffs on Barmore without moving him. Officer Hansel reported that Barmore was, quote, breathing in very ragged breaths that had several seconds between them, end quote. But he still handcuffed him. As he hears this man breathing, taking his last breaths and dying, he still thought that the thing to do in that moment was to handcuff this man. Officers called for an ambulance within approximately 1 minute after shots were fired. The church where the shooting occurred is across the street from a fire station, and emergency personnel were able to respond within moments of being called. Emergency personnel reported finding Barmore on his back in the kitchen area, not moving, not breathing, and reported finding not moving, not breathing, and pulseless. So by the time they got there, the young man had died. Not only had by the time they got there, this young man had died, but he had died while these children and while these school children watched all of these things take place. Officers called for an ambulance within approximately 1 minute after shots were fired. The church where the shooting occurred is across the street from a fire station, and emergency personnel were able to respond within moments of being called. Emergency personnel reported finding Barmore on his back in the kitchen area, not moving, not breathing, and pulseless. Emergency personnel asked permission from an officer to move Barmore from behind the counter to provide more room to work on him, and were given permission by the officers to move Barmore. Barmore was pronounced dead by emergency personnel while on the scene of the shooting. The events described above, from the moment officers North and Poole saw Barmore in the front of the church to the time they discharged their weapons, shooting and killing him, occurred in just more than 2 minutes. So all those things that we just read through, this was 2 minutes of actions. This 120 seconds. In 120 seconds, seeing this black man outside of the church, and then chasing this black man inside of the church past school children. In that amount of time, they decided that this man's life no longer had any value, that this man's life no longer mattered, that it was nothing that could be salvaged from this man's life, and that the community and that society would be better with him being eliminated. In 2 minutes, they made that decision. In 2 minutes, they made that decision. I can't even pick what cereal I want in 2 minutes, but they can decide whether this man should live or die in 2 minutes. The forensic evidence is consistent with Officer Poole's and Officer North's assertion that Officer Poole and Barmore were in close proximity when Officer Poole's weapon was fired, supporting the assertion that Officer Poole and Barmore were struggling over the weapon. The nature of the injury to Barmore's neck, the trajectory of the bullet, analysis of blood patterns, the presence of Barmore's DNA inside the ejection port of Officer Poole's gun, and the identification of DNA that may have been Poole's underneath Barmore's fingernails are all evidence that Barmore was shot at close range. That he was shot at close range. Not that he struggled with the gun to try to take the gun. That's evidence that he was shot at close range. A witness statement that Barmore stated as he was running downstairs that he was not going to go back, or words to that effect, indicate a mindset more likely to engage in struggle rather than surrender. Assumption. And again, these are witness statements. In addition, on-scene field notes by the sergeants who separately interviewed officers North and Poole immediately after the shooting while still at the church indicate that the officers' first accounts of the events given minutes after the shooting were materially consistent with their later written supplement reports provided to RPD a few days after the incident, that Barmore grabbed Officer Poole's gun and that a struggle over the control of the gun ensued. This evidence indicates that there was a struggle over Officer Poole's weapon, and Officer Poole shot Barmore from close proximity during this struggle. Officer Poole and Officer North stated that Barmore's hands were on Officer Poole's weapon during the struggle and at the moment the weapon was fired. Upon examination of Poole's weapon, a spent cartridge casing was located lodged in the chamber, consistent with interference with the weapon while being fired. Gunshot residue analysis did not reveal gunshot residue on Barmore's hands, and Barmore's fingers or handprints were not found on Officer Poole's weapon. So they telling you that he tried to take the gun, and they giving you all this evidence to try to say that he took the gun, but then they let you know his fingerprints not on the gun, it's no gunshot residue on his hands, even though the gun was shot. But they gave you 10 lists of things to try to convince you into misreading this, that this man was holding on to the gun. And then they also let you know that the men who was involved in killing them got 2 days to write their report before they had to submit it or turn it in. So they could have sat down and wrote the reports together like it was a class project. No fingerprints on the gun. No fingerprints on the gun. They used the justification of murdering this man because they said that he was trying to struggle and take the gun away, but it's not, his fingerprints not on the gun, and then there's no gunshot residue on his hands. And then here come this next sentence. The lack of gunshot residue or prints, however, does not preclude the possibility that Barmore's hands were on Officer Poole's weapon when it was fired. Gunshot residue was not always found, even when it is known that a hand was on a weapon when it was fired. The evidence is consistent with Officer North's statement that he shot Barmore because he heard a shot and did not know whether Officer Poole had been shot and did not know who had control of Officer Poole's weapon. The forensic evidence is consistent with Officer North's statement that he shot Barmore as Barmore's right rear side faced him, aiming at Barmore's back and firing what he believed to be 3 or 4 rounds, striking Barmore in the back. Shot this man in the back. 4 cartridge casings from Officer North's gun were found. 3 of the wounds to Barmore were found to have come from Officer North's weapon. The 4th wound to Barmore was a neck wound consistent with a bullet fired from close range by Officer Poole's weapon. The trajectories of the wounds caused by bullets from Officer North's weapon, as well as analysis of the blood patterns and other forensic evidence, are consistent with Officer North's description of Barmore falling and turning as he was shot. The 4th bullet appears to have struck the water pipe of the sink in the, quote, kitchen area, resulting in the water spraying the area until the water to the pipe was turned off. Other than possibly the children in the basement, the only apparent civilian witness to Officer Poole's shooting of Barmore said in the written statement she gave to RPD the day of the incident that she saw Barmore come out of the boiler room with his hands up and saw one officer shoot Barmore from about 4 feet away. The only person who was not involved, the only person who was a neutral party, said that they seen this man come out of the boiler room with his hands up and seen these police officers shoot this man. This is what a child had to see. A child seen, a young person seen these things take place. They seen him come out with his hands up and then seen the police officers shoot him while his hands was up. The witness states that she then stepped out of the doorway and heard 2 or 3 additional gunshots after that. This formal statement is consistent with the information she gave to an officer while still on scene, moments after the shooting. Later, media reports quote this witness as stating that, quote, the officer shined his flashlight into the boiler room and told him to come out. He came out real slow with his hands up and his head down, and they shot him. He fell over into the sink. He tried to get back up and they shot him again. A heavyset officer was the one who was shooting him while he was on the ground. I'm going to read that again. The witness states through a formal statement that she gave to an officer while on the scene The officer shined his flashlight into the boiler room and told him to come out. He came out real slow with his hands up and his head down, and they shot him. He fell over into the sink. He tried to get back up, and they shot him again. A heavy-set officer was the one who was shooting him while he was on the ground. The witness's initial statement to police is at odds with Officer North's and Poole's version of events in some respects, of course, because they the ones who murdered him, so they ain't gonna tell you how they murdered him. And consistent with their version of events in other respects. Consistent with the forensic evidence, this witness saw an officer and Barmore facing each other and saw the officer fire one time. Also consistent with the evidence, this witness heard 3 shots after she backed away from the door. The witness's perception of the distance between the officer and Barmore may be consistent with the forensic evidence, depending on whether the witness's statement that the officers were, quote unquote, about 4 feet from Barmore meant 4 feet from person to person or from gun to person. The forensic evidence regarding the trajectory of the initial shot does not appear to be consistent with this witness's statement. The witness's later reported statements to the media are significantly different than her initial statements to police and are not supported by the forensic evidence. A second civilian witness, according to her written statement, stated that she did not see the shooting, but that she heard 4 gunshots and then turned to see an officer with his gun pointed in a downward position. So the second witness is saying the same thing that the first witness said, that she seen these police officers shoot this man while he was on the ground. Later, media reports assert that this witness stated that the officers, quote, fired as many as 8 rounds into Barmore, including at least 1 shot into his head, end quote. The forensic evidence is consistent with this witness's initial written statement, but not with later media reports. RPD policy authorizes an officer to use deadly force to, quote-unquote, protect himself from harm or others from what he reasonably believes to be an imminent threat of death or great bodily harm. A preordinance of the currently available evidence indicates that at the moment deadly force was used by officers North and Poole, the use of that force was consistent with RPD policy. However, as detailed below, the actions of Officer North and Poole leading up to the shooting violated RPD policy and were not consistent with RPD training or sound tactics. The officers' handling of this incident placed the officers and numerous civilians, including youth children, at increased risk of serious harm. And so that's Mark Barmore. That is the murder of Mark Barmore, which took place in Rockford, Illinois, August 24th, 2009. The officers who were involved in that murder, in that 21st century lynching, were officers Oda Poole, he killed 5 people, shot 5 people, killed 3 people, or shot 3 people? Who shot 3, including Barmore, and a dog. 3 people and a dog. Who
killed 2 people, shot 1 other person, and killed a dog.
Okay, so Officer Oda Poole, who killed 2 people, shot another individual who survived, and also killed a dog. I know that the killing of the dog may get more sympathy than the killing of the black man from some people. And again, this was found to be justified. This killing, this 21st century lynching, this murder was found to be justified. And again, we just went through how these 2 children who didn't know Mark Barmore, wasn't related to Mark Barmore, they just was there. The only neutral parties that was there said that they seen these police officers shoot this man while he was unarmed. They said they seen these police officers shoot this man while he came out of the boiler room with his hands up. And they said they seen these police officers shoot this man while he laid on the ground. And those officers, Oda Poole got Tom McNamara brought Oda Poole back personally. $700,000. That was his pension. Blood money. So again, for more, we go to more recent events. This is Denzel Duvant. Denzel Duvant beat at the hands of the Rockford Police Department while unarmed. I know that's everybody's favorite line. Well, was it he was unarmed? Why did he have a gun? He had a knife. He was beat unarmed, no gun, no knife, no weapon. He was, well, why did he resist? Why was he didn't resist. He was beat while he was handcuffed. I know that's everybody's next favorite line. He was beat while, well, why did he run away? He did run away. He had surrendered. He had gave himself up and still beat by the Rockford Police Department, still battered by the Rockford Police Department. People see this picture again. People see this picture all the time and ask us if this man is even still alive. And so, yeah, and so again, we not this picture is not to try to profit off of nobody's pain or profit off of no trauma. But as it stands in this city, people don't know that these things happen to people in the community. Faustin Guaitigo, murdered by the Winnebago County Sheriff deputies inside of his home. Faustin Guaitigo murdered April 10th by the Winnebago County Sheriff deputies inside of his home. Not in New York, not in LA, not in Ferguson, not in Cleveland. Right here, Rockford, Illinois, in unincorporated Winnebago. The same Winnebago County cruisers you see flying all up and down these streets all the time went inside this man's home and murdered him like a hit squad. Murdered him inside of his home. A week later, they find a way to do crisis management and get a white man out of the place they was boarded up in one piece. But this man, no crisis management. No crisis management, no de-escalation when it came to this man. They went in there shooting first and asking questions later. After they shot him about 8 times, they handcuffed him too. Told him to stop resisting. Shot him 8 times, tased him, then handcuffed him and told him to stop resisting as he was laying on the ground dying. All right, let's go through a rundown of all these different names again. 1 second. All right, let's do it. Mark Barmore, murdered by the Rockford Police Department, August 24th, 2009. The officers were found justified and went right back to work. Michael Sago Jr., murdered by an off-duty Winnebago County Sheriff deputy. The officer was found to be justified in the murder, and they went right back to work. Philip Johnson, murdered January 28, 2012 by the Rockford Police Department. The officers were found justified in the murder, and they went right on back to work. Logan Bell, murdered October 11, 2012 by the Rockford Police Department. The officers were found justified in the murder, and they went right on back to work. Eddie Patterson, murdered November 5th, 2017, and that murder was found to be justified. Kerry Blake, murdered December 30th, 2018. That murder was found to be justified, and the officers involved in that went right on back to work. Geno Washington, killed inside the Winnebago County Jail October 28, 2019. No CO that was there had any kind of culpability or responsibility. There was nothing said about the environment or the people there being negligible, or the family was given no true answers on his death, and everybody was found to be justified in their actions, and everything was found to have been done by the book, and all of those people went right on back to work. Joseph McCormick died inside the jail about a month later, December 1st, 2019. No surprise, since they swept the Geno Washington under the rug, that this issue will continue to manifest. Joseph McCormick, whose family said they did not believe him to be suicidal. They had just spoken to him, was told that their loved one committed suicide, and none of the COs who were supposed to be there to make sure nobody can commit suicide inside the jail were found to be negligible or found to be responsible for that taking place. And all of them people went right on back to work. So I hope you don't have a loved one inside that jail. Mikey Guzman, August 23rd, 2020, ran down in the streets of South Beloit by a police officer. That police officer ran down and killed in the streets by a South Beloit police officer. That police officer was found to be justified, have done no wrongdoing in running Mikey Guzman over, who was not a suspect, who did not have a warrant, who did not have a weapon, was not posing no type of imminent threat. This man just ran him over. The officer was found to be justified, and he went right on back to work to drive police cruisers and put continue to put pedestrians in danger. And then Tyrus Jones, October 2nd, 2020, shot while he was running away by the Rockford Police Department by Officer Dominic McNeese. Officer Dominic McNeese went right on back to work, was justified in his shooting. And before 2 full months even passed, this is what Dominic McNeese was on the streets doing. This is what Dominic McNeese was on the streets doing. This is what happened when you justify these shootings, when you justify police brutality, when you justify police terrorism. This is the results of those things. This is the results. This is what happens when you have a leadership who don't address root causes. This is what happens when you have leadership that don't address root causes. This is what happens when you have leadership that weaponizes the police against black and brown communities. This is what happens. This is what happens when people's lives are made to be political statements. This is what happens. Beat while handcuffed. Rockford Police Department. Same officer who beat this man same one of the officers who participated and beat this man half to death while he was handcuffed, shot Tyrus Jones 2 months earlier while he was running away. And he was found justified in that too. Make sure you get a good look at this. Denzel Duvant beat while handcuffed by the Rockford Police Department. Beat half to death while handcuffed. No weapon, not running away. Didn't have no hostages. They put handcuffs on him and they beat him, but they put handcuffs on the man who shot up Don Carter and he got to the jail just fine. He got to the jail just fine. Man shoot up the bowling alley and get handcuffed. He get to the jail just fine. This man right here, he don't shoot up a bowling alley, but he black, so when he get handcuffed, it's a different story. Faustin Guay-Tigo, murdered inside his home by the Winnebago County Sheriff deputies. Murdered inside his home by the Winnebago County Sheriff deputies. Murdered inside his home. But I know, since nobody cares about them violating all types of laws and policies to get inside his home and murder him, they just care that he had a pole in his hand when he was shot. Never mind the fact that before he ever got into the proximity of the officer who shot him with the pole, he had already been shot multiple times. This video on the May 30th Alliance page. You watching? You on the Facebook? You watching the Facebook? Go ahead, scroll right on up, exit out of here, and watch this. You watch the work of the Winnebago County Sheriff deputies. You watch how they devalue this man's life. You watch how they devalue this man's life, and they kill this man not only in front of his wife, in front of his kids. In front of his wife and in front of his kids. All right, January 28th, 2012. Name of victim, Philip Johnson. Officer involved, Amado Soria. Location of event, Longwood Avenue. Injuries from event, 1 murdered. Winnebago Boone Integrity Task Force findings, justified. Release date of findings, June 22nd, 2012. The fatal shooting of Philip K. Johnson Jr. in January by a Rockford police officer was deemed justified by the Winnebago County State's Attorney's Office. State's Attorney Joe Briscato announced that today his office concurred with the grand jury's ruling from a day earlier that the use of deadly force by Officer Amado Soria was justified. The Winnebago County Integrity Task Force, led by Illinois State Police Lieutenant Kurt Cavanaugh, completed its investigation into the shooting in late March. Wednesday, Briscato and Deputy State's Attorneys Marilyn Height Ross presented the evidence from the task force investigation to the grand jury. Briscato said at today's news conference that the officers, quote, acted pursuant to their training, end quote. Rockford Police Chief Chet Epperson added, quote, we are happy with the outcome of the task force, end quote. Briscato gave a detailed narrative of the events leading up to the shooting of the 29-year-old man in the early hours of Saturday, January 28th in the 300 block of Longwood Street. The events unfolded with 911 calls regarding a large fight and a shot fired at the San Jose Dance Club on East State Street. While en route to the scene, police were told a Pontiac G6 driven by a woman and occupied by a male passenger armed with a gun, fled the scene. Rockford police officer John Johnson, 43, stopped the vehicle about 1:30 a.m. in a business parking lot in the 300 block of Longwood Street. With his gun drawn, he immediately ordered the driver, Chiquita Trotter, and front seat passenger Roy Gatlin to show their hands. They complied by sticking their hands out the vehicle's window. A third person, spotted by the officer in the back seat, did not comply. That person was later identified as Philip K. Johnson Jr. Briscato said Philip Johnson leaned into the front seat area, put one hand on Trotter's leg and his other on the gear shift, put the vehicle in reverse, and ran Officer Johnson's vehicle. At this point, the driver, Trotter, tried but was unable to quickly unfasten her seatbelt and get out. Officer Johnson holstered his weapon, went to the driver's side front door, and was partially inside the vehicle trying to help the woman. Officer Soria, 45, an 18-year veteran of the department, arrived on the scene, exited his vehicle with his gun drawn but carried at his side, and he too ordered Philip Johnson to show his hands, only to witness the man put the car in reverse and ran the officer's squad car again. Briscato said Soria then saw Philip Johnson reach into the back seat. Fearing for the safety of Officer Johnson, Trotter, her front seat passenger, and other officers on the scene, Soria fired 2 times through the front windshield, striking Philip Johnson twice in the chest. Briscato said Trotter and Gatlin were unharmed and were not charged. Philip Johnson died at the scene. Briscato estimated 6 minutes passed between the time the vehicle was pulled over and the shooting. Deputy State's Attorney Ross said police recovered from the rear floorboard a loaded .40 caliber Springfield handgun, which contained Philip Johnson's DNA or skin cells. They pulled it from the, again, let's make sure that, because some of these things are misleading narratives. He did not have the gun. He was not holding on to the gun. The gun was not in his possession. They are saying that they recovered the gun after they had already killed him. Officers also recovered from the vehicle a prescription bottle containing cocaine. What they got it down? Who wrote this? Who wrote this? Excuse me. But that, again, that's how they do these narratives. Somebody get killed by the police, and they want to find anything that you may have ever done in your life that may be negative, or anything that you may have ever done in your life that may be perceived or deemed to be negative or illegal is brought back up. When Trayvon Martin was killed, they found a picture of Trayvon Martin smoking a blunt. When Michael Brown was killed, they brought up that Michael Brown stole a pack of cigarillos. Never mind that the officer who encountered Michael Brown ain't have no damn idea about him stealing the cigarillos. And so this is a regular narrative. Anytime a black or brown person is shot down, anytime any person, is shot down in the streets by the police department, instead of like how it's done with mass shooters, where they go and find the best thing the mass shooter ever did. Somebody shoot up Don Carter, first picture you see is of them in a military uniform, and people speaking about mental health issues that they may have, as opposed to if a person is killed by a police officer, shot down by a police officer, the first thing you see is a mug shot from 5 years ago, or a mug shot from 10 years ago, or the first thing you hear about it, the first thing you see is them being is something that they did 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Is you hear stories about a fight that they got into, or you hear stories about a criminal record that they have. And then these are done in an attempt to dehumanize the person that has been victimized. This is done in an attempt to criminalize the person who has been victimized. This is done in an attempt to stigmatize the person who has been victimized, because in a usual situation, in a regular situation, a person is shot and people ask, what happened? Why did this person shoot them? When someone is shot by a police officer, the question is inversed, it's reversed, is what did this person do to deserve to be shot? And as long as we continue to ask that question, you'll have stories like this where they continue to try to give you an answer. You'll have pictures of Trayvon Martin smoking a blunt, even though he was shot down in the streets in the middle of a night with a bag of Skittles. You'll have videos of Michael Brown stealing cigarillos, even though he was shot down in the middle of a street because he, quote unquote, didn't comply with the officer. But those things are done to paint a narrative, to push a narrative. Where are we at? Officers, I ain't reading that again. Briscato said Philip Johnson's DNA was also on the bottle. Winnebago County State's Attorney Sue Fiducia said Winnebago County State's Coroner Sue Fiducia said no cocaine was found in Philip Johnson's system, but said he was legally intoxicated. So he, again, legally intoxicated. That's a narrative. Briscato also said Philip Johnson was a member of. All right, I ain't finna go. Briscato said the task force will cover the investigation. Also, I was a counselor in my Okay, let me read this part. Police officers from Winnebago County departments have used deadly force 31 times since September 1992, according to the information from the state's attorney's office and Register Star archives. Half of those times, the use of force killed a suspect. A grand jury has found all officers' use of force in those incidents to be justified, and that is the point. These things that they put out, some of the specific isolated incidents that lead to these events, they point out, like we read about the Mark Barmore situation. Them following Mark Barmore in a church where there's children, where there's innocent bystanders, shooting this man, and witness statements say that they shot this man while he was unarmed, and then shot him while he laid on the ground. Those things are done in these situations because they don't care about these people's lives. So they don't value this person's life. They're not done in a fear of someone else being harmed or a fear of them being harmed. Even in the story of Philip Johnson, even if what they said was true, because that's the other issue with this, is that there are no checks and balances. Police investigate the police when these things take place. It should be noted that in the first one, when we read about Mark Barmore, the second that somebody was not a police officer and gave their interpretation of what happened or their perspective of what happened, it was different than what the police officer said. And these were not people who were involved in the shooting or people who were Mark Barmore's companions of any sort. These were just people who were there and saw something different take place than what the police officer said took place. And so I wonder if the story was told from the perspective of the people with Philip Johnson, how many of those people will have something different to say about how these things took place. And again, the main point is that neither of these officers' lives were in any type of imminent danger. Neither of these officers' lives had any type of threat being posed to them. The reason that they killed Philip Johnson and shot Philip Johnson was because they devalued his life. Not because they valued their own lives so much, but because they valued his life so little. Mark Barmore was not killed because Oda Poole and Officer North valued their own lives so much. They were killed because they valued Mark Barmore's life so little. And these shootings, all of these shootings and these murders and in-custody deaths that they are saying are justified, they are not justified because people value police officers' lives so much. They are justified because people value the victims of police brutality's lives so little. And so, let's see. Okay, let's go. Let's read another one. Date of incident, August 23rd, 2020. Name of victim, Michael Guzman. Officer involved, Sawyer Kirk. Location of event, South Beloit. Injuries from event, 1 murdered. Winnebago Boone Integrity Task Force findings, justified. Don't got the release date to the findings on here. A grieving mother who lost a son when he was struck and killed nearly 2 months ago by a South Beloit Police Patrol Officer Squad car is... Excuse me, sorry, let me read that again. A grieving mother who lost a son when he was struck and killed nearly 2 months ago by a South Beloit Patrol Officer Squad car is now losing patience. Juanita Eslora is the mother of Michael Guzman, 35, the man who was struck in the early morning hours of August 23rd by Officer Sawyer Kirk. Eslora was joined by about 20 family members and friends Saturday in the 600 block of Black Hawk Boulevard, where they prayed and later lit candles and demanded to know why the investigation is taking so long. Quote, "He was my best friend. He was my son. He was my everything," end quote, Eslora said. Guzman's sister, Olivia Guzman, described her brother as a, quote, people person, end quote, and the father of 5 children. Quote, "He would bend over backwards for a whole lot of people," end quote, she said. Quote, "He was a good father and a good brother. We want answers. We want peace and we want closure, end quote. South Beloit Police Chief Adam Truman also attended the gathering and expressed his condolences to the family, but he could not provide them any answers about the ongoing investigation as it was immediately turned over to the Winnebago County Sheriff's Department. Winnebago, yeah. Quote, "We're in the same boat," he said. No, we're not in the same. You're not. I gotta intervene in some of the stuff that people are saying. The police chief, whose police officer ran down somebody's child in the streets, is not in the same boat as the victim of the family. We're waiting for the investigation to conclude, end quote. Once the investigation is complete, it will be turned over to the Winnebago County State's Attorney's Office. Meanwhile, Kurth, a member of the department since November, remains on administrative leave pending the outcome of an internal investigation. That's paid leave, right? So they're using the word administrative leave. I'm going to re-say that sentence one more time with the right word. Meanwhile, Kurth, the man who ran over Mikey Guzman and killed him, a member of the department since November, remains on paid leave pending the outcome of an internal investigation, which will also be handled by the Sheriff's Department. More police investigating police. That investigation is expected to determine whether the officer followed all policies and procedures before and after the incident. At the time of this being released, have the Justify come down? Yeah, it happened. Yeah, it happened. Real Justified. And so again, this just goes to show how far this lack of accountability, how far the lack of transparency goes. This man did not even, Mikey Guzman was not under investigation. Mikey Guzman did not have any warrant. Mikey Guzman was not being apprehended or arrested. And Mikey Guzman's life was valued less than Officer Sawyer Kurth's freedom. Because if me or you was to run somebody down in the streets in a negligible way like that, we would be held accountable. We would have some type of charges brought forward against us. And it definitely wouldn't take this extended amount of time for it to happen. And so you see how far this blue code stretches. It goes past just criminal investigations or murders of people who are being apprehended, and it goes into what happened with Jeff Pobjecki, who murdered Michael Sago Jr. while he was off duty. You can be off duty and kill somebody, or off duty and shoot somebody like Carla Red, and it be justified because you wear a blue uniform and you have a badge. Or you can run somebody down in the streets like Sawyer Kurth, and it can be justified, and you can be put right back onto them streets because it's deemed justified because you have a uniform and a badge. Need to rotate. We need a thing that spin around.
What's that?
So we need like a thing that lift up in the air and spin around. So I can, the whole side.
I did see at Best Buy that there's webcam.
Webcam?
Yeah.
What's that?
Like 360 degrees.
Really?
Webcam instead of a phone.
Really? Right. How much did it cost?
$50 or something.
Okay. This is Denzel Duvant. Again, we done showed this picture multiple times. We'll continue to show it. This is not in any types of hopes to profit off of trauma or any type of anything like that. Denzel Duvant not only has been spoken to at every step of this process, but has continued to be spoken to, and hopefully we'll have him speaking on some events coming up here. But this is the face of police terrorism in Rockford, Illinois. This is the face of police terrorism in Winnebago County. This man beat and assaulted while he was handcuffed. Not while he was running away, not while he had a knife, or not while he had a gun, or not while he had a bat, or not any of the litany of things in which have been used to justify the 21st century lynchings of people in the streets. And that is what they are. That is what's going on in these streets. That is what happened to Faustin Guaitigo. It was a 21st century lynching. That is what happened to Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown and Freddie Gray and Sandra Bland and George Floyd. These are 21st century lynchings that are being sanctioned by the state and taking place in the streets. And so look at this face. This man was beat while he was handcuffed. This man was assaulted and beat by multiple police officers while being detained. Not while in the midst of committing some type of violent crime or some type of violent act, but while being detained, these things happen. Denzel Duvant. This didn't happen 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 20 years ago. This took place January 5th, 2021, right on the west side of Rockford, right by the Rockford Police Department, beat while handcuffed. This is Faustin Guaitigo. I don't think do we got a Jose Gonzalez Jr. picture? We got another Jose board. I already got it. Okay. This is Faustin Guaitigo, murdered by the Winnebago County Sheriff deputies inside of his home. Video can be found on the May 30th Alliance Facebook page. Video can be found on the Twitter page, Instagram page. Murdered inside of his home, not 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 20 years ago. April 10th, 2021. Shot multiple times. After being shot multiple times, after being tased as he laid on the ground, officers went to handcuff him and then told him to stop resisting arrest as he laid there dying. As he laid there succumbing to his wounds, he was told to stop resisting arrest. A week later, same Winnebago County Sheriff's deputies found a way to talk a white man out of the building he was in. Found a way to de-escalate the situation when a white man was the one that was involved. But when it was Faustin Guaitigo, he was shot in his home. When it was Faustin Guaitigo, he was killed in his home. Oh yeah, that's right. I'll take it. Okay, this one's a little rough. This one's a.
Against the windows, I think.
Oh yeah, this is the one from. This is the one that got arrested for holding this sign. This is Jose Gonzalez Jr., who was shot while running away. 19 years old, this young man was shot while running away. Now on April 10th, Winnebago County Sheriff deputy shot a man because they said he was coming towards them. On April 11th, Rockford Police Department shot a man because he was running away from him. So it's clear in these situations that there is no right way. There is no thing to do if you feel in fear or if you feel you are not allowed to have a fight or flight response when police department is involved, when workers of violence are involved. Again, this young man shot while running away by the Rockford Police Department, just like Tyrus Jones was shot while running away by the police department, just like this man was beat while handcuffed by the Rockford Police Department. These things are not taking place in a faraway land. These things are not taking place in Birmingham or in California. These things are taking place in Rockford, Illinois in 2021. So take a look at that face. You take a good look at that face. Denzel Duvant, beat while handcuffed. Not while holding a gun, not while trying to abduct somebody, not while trying to assault somebody, beat while handcuffed. Denzel Duvant. Let's see. All right, let's go. I'm gonna go through and read the dates, and then we'll go through and read another excerpt out of the Winnebago Boone Integrity Task Force. Okay. Mark Barmore, murdered by the Rockford Police Department August 24th, 2009. The murder was found to be justified. Michael Sago Jr., murdered by Winnebago County Sheriff Deputy October 1st, 2011. The murder was found to be justified. Philip Johnson, murdered January 28th, 2012 by the Rockford Police Department. The murder was found to be justified. Logan Bell, murdered October 11th, 2012 by the Rockford Police Department. The murder was found to be justified. Demetrius Bennett, murdered November 1st, 2012 by the Rockford Police Department, and the murder was found to be justified. Eddie Patterson, murdered November 5th, 2017 by the Rockford Police Department, and the murder was found to be justified. Kerry Blake, murdered December 30th, 2018 by Rockford Police Department, and the murder was found to be justified. Eugene Washington, died in the Winnebago County Jail. Again, these are both Geno Washington and Joseph McCormick. Both died in the custody of the Winnebago County Jail. And so there's a litany of things you have to go through when you speak about that. First, you have to say, if for some reason the reasons that they have named for Eugene Washington and Joseph McCormick dying are true, then it was negligence that led to their death. Then the correction officers who were there should be held accountable the same way a doctor or a physician would be held accountable if they were negligent and that led to a patient dying. And as it stands, neither family believed the reasonings which have been given to them for the cause of death of their loved one inside the Winnebago County Jail. Joseph McCormick, December 1st, 2019. Eugene Washington, October 28th, 2019. Mikey Guzman, who we just read an excerpt out of the Winnebago Boone Integrity Task Force pamphlet about him. Mikey Guzman ran down by a South Beloit police cruiser on August 23rd, 2020. That officer was found to be justified in running him over and was sent back to work. And then Tyrus Jones shot October 2nd, 2020 while he was running away. And then to extrapolate that out, this is Denzel Duvant, who was beat January 5th, 2021. The officers who beat Denzel Duvant half to death were not found justified. There was not even an investigation into them beating this man like that, and they went right back to work. On April 10th, 2021, Winnebago County Sheriff deputies murdered Faustin Guaitigo inside of his home. That's currently under Winnebago Boone Integrity Task Force investigation, based on the fact that nobody has ever been found to not be justified in the murder of people in the streets when they wear a uniform. It is unlikely there'll be any true accountability for his murder. And then the most recent victim of police terrorism in Rockford, Illinois, Jose Gonzalez Jr., who was shot while he was running away by the Rockford Police Department. Shot while he was running away by the Rockford Police Department. All right, let's read another. We'll find another excerpt out of here to read. Okay. Date of incident, December 30th, 2018. Name of victim, Carrie Blake. Officer involved, Matt Krantz. Location of event, 1100 block of Green Street. Injuries from event, 1 murdered. Winnebago Boone Integrity Task Force findings, justified. Release date of findings, July 2nd, 2019. Approximately 20% of adults in America have mental health issues. Carrie Blake was diagnosed with severe mental health issues, specifically schizophrenia. Carrie's poor mental health issues have been known and documented by defendant Krantz on and before December 30th, 2019. Carrie's poor mental health issues have been, on December 30th, 2018, Carrie experienced a mental health crisis. In the morning of December 30th, 2018, defendant Rockford Police Department officers Wells, Lawler, and Bennett performed a wellness check on Carrie in response to an anonymous call stating that Carrie was moving his furniture from his residence at 1124 Green Street into the middle of Green Street. Responding officers noted Carrie's erratic behavior and refusal to discuss the matter with the police and left the scene. Later that day, Carrie's mental health crisis continued. Carrie entered a minivan parked near his home, mistaking it for his daughter's minivan of light color and model. He began driving the mistaken minivan around the block. Upon realizing there were passengers in the minivan, he stopped and let the passengers out of the vehicle. He immediately drove the minivan to his home, 1 block from where he initially entered the minivan, parked, and walked to his home at 1124 Green Street. At the time of the occurrence, Carrie's daughter, plaintiff Tykeria Blake, owned a minivan of the same color, make, and model as the vehicle Carrie drove to his home on December 30th, 2018. At approximately 1:30 p.m., in response to Carey's schizophrenic episode, defendant Rockford Police Department officers Lawler and Wells returned to Carey's home. Officer Lawler took statements from the owner of the minivan that Carey mistakenly took, as well as the passengers. Officer Lawler observed Carey inside his home again, documented Carey's diminished mental capacity, specifically referencing the incident from earlier in the day. Several officers on the scene knew of Carey Blake's severe mental illness and informed other officers on the scene of Carey's severe mental illness. Prior to the defendant officers breaching Carey's home, defendant Rockford police officers documented Carey's mental illness and erratic behavior in police reports on at least 18 different occasions over the course of several years. Because officers on scene were aware of Carey's severe mental illness and erratic behavior from their previous encounters with him, they sought Carey's family and help with dealing with Carey. Carey's family, including plaintiff Tykeria Blake, arrived at Carey's home. Carey's family spoke to Carey and tried to convince Carey to come out of the house for approximately 10 minutes. Carey's mental illness and confusion prevailed over his family's attempts to talk to him into coming out of the house. Carey's behavior became more erratic and bizarre as his mental health episode continued. Officers on scene observed Carey hold up random items at the window, such as money. Carey never acknowledged his family's presence at the scene. After some time of attempting to communicate with Carey, his family members advised the police that his mental illness had spiraled out of control to the point where he needed time to recover. Officers on scene noted that Carey did not comprehend the seriousness of the situation and became agitated with attempts to communicate with him at the window. After family members were unable to coax Carey out of the house, defendant City of Rockford officers refused to let the family assist in de-escalating the encounter and escorted the family away from the house. So let me just go through and have a recap of some of these things. And so what we're reading right now is the story of what happened to Carey Blake. And as you are seeing, this man is having a mental health episode. The Rockford Police Department knows that this man has had mental health episodes, so it's not foreign to them. Instead of allowing the family to continue to interact with him, to allow the family, because the family values his life, so they'll spend days, weeks, months out there trying to talk him down. Instead of allowing them to continue try to talk to Carey, they have now told them that they cannot talk to him anymore. So he has now been isolated from the only group of people in this situation who genuinely care about his well-being. As the Blake family was escorted away from the house, Carey opened the front door and threw the keys to the aforementioned minivan towards an officer on scene. In addition to giving up the keys, Carey tossed a ceremonial and decorative samurai sword underhand, approximately 10 feet out of the front door. By this point, Carey was no longer in possession of any stolen property and had demonstrated an attempt to de-escalate the situation by disarming himself. Defendant City of Rockford had no intention of de-escalating the situation despite Carey's surrender of the stolen keys and ceremonial samurai sword. Instead, despite Carey's increasing mental instability, defendant City of Rockford deployed the SWAT team, K-9 police dog units, a ballistic armored tactical transport, and as if preparing for war, a 40-ton, 6-wheeled, blast-resistant former military vehicle with a machine gun turret called Mine-Resistant Ambush Protected Vehicle. Defendant Matthew Krantz was the individual who drove the MRAP to the scene of Carey's house. And so, just for anybody who maybe don't have the greatest imagination, let me help you some. So, this man who was in the middle of having a mental health episode, a mental health crisis, and the Rockford Police Department have interacted with this man having a mental health crisis multiple times. Instead of continuing to try to talk this man down. Oh, let me see something. Oh, shit. Yeah. Slide it up. You know what's gonna happen. I'll let you do it. Okay. All right, we having logistical problems. Terry gonna take care of it. So again, instead of trying to Instead of trying to talk this man down, who is clearly having a mental health episode, instead of valuing this man's life, instead of caring about this man's mental health and physical health, they called in the SWAT team. He has no hostages. There's no victims involved in this situation. They have no reason to believe he has any guns or any type of weaponry, but they called in the SWAT team. They brought in K9 dogs, and they brought a tank to this man's house. They brought a tank to the house of a man having a mental health crisis. Defendant Matthew Krantz is on record stating publicly that the MRAP definitely has that wow factor, and boasted that the MRAP can be driven, quote, right up to someone's front door, end quote. Krantz further acknowledged that the vehicle is, quote, intimidating, and described the military vehicle as, quote, an insurance policy, adding, quote, hopefully this is just something we'll use in parades. So the same man, and just to be clear, this will be the man who will kill Kerry Blake. This man is bragging about this tank outside of this situation. He calls the tank intimidating. He brags about it being an insurance policy and hopefully not having to use it. But they're not bringing this tank to a bank robbery. They're not bringing this tank to a heist or to an abduction or to some type of drug deal. They're bringing this tank to the home of a man having a mental health crisis. While defendant City of Rockford brought military equipment to the house, several officers on scene knew of no firearms inside the residence. No officer on scene had any evidence or reasonable belief that Kerry was in possession of a firearm, but they brought a tank. Several officers on scene were equipped with non-lethal weapons to contain Kerry. Defendant City of Rockford officers had tasers at the ready and began loading, quote, less lethal shotguns with beanbag rounds to use non-lethal force to incapacitate Kerry. Defendant Matthew Krantz did not equip a, quote, less lethal shotgun or non-lethal weapon. To the contrary, he armed himself with his personally owned Glock 23 firearm. The personally owned Glock 23 was the firearm with which defendant Matthew Krantz would ultimately shoot Kerry 4 times, killing him. So again, they just went through and spoke about how all of these different officers were loading up shotguns with bean bags, were loading up their tasers, and one officer, the same officer that rode in on the tank, the same officer that bragged about the tank, went in not with his job weapon, his service weapon, but went in with his personal weapon. After bringing military-style equipment to the residential neighborhood to surround the house of a mentally ill man with no firearms, defendant City of Rockford, through the conduct of his police officers, again escalated the situation. Defendant City of Rockford began launching rounds of Lorium capsium canisters, commonly known as pepper spray, into the house. The rounds are designed to cause eye irritation, coughing, and sneezing. These officers ultimately launched at least 12 rounds of pepper spray into Kerry's home. Kerry appeared unresponsive to the chemicals launched into his home, and officers observed him pacing around the house without a firearm. Officers observed him smoking cigarettes and carrying a crowbar. After launching several pepper spray canisters without their desired result, law enforcement again turned to the Blake family for assistance. So after they throw a whole bunch of 12 canisters of pepper spray inside the home of a man having a mental health crisis, then they go to speak to his family again. After launching at approximately 7:13 p.m., more than 6 hours after officers were dispatched to the home, the police department had Blake family members speak over a loudspeaker to make another attempt to get Kerry out of the house. The attempts failed and Kerry remained in the house. At approximately 7:50 p.m., law enforcement employed by defendant City of Rockford abandoned all attempts at negotiating with Kerry or de-escalating the situation and decided to breach the front and back doors of Kerry's house in order to storm into the house and make an arrest. Despite the lack of exigent circumstances to necessitate a quick arrest, these officers were determined to make the arrest immediately. No officers or decision makers documented any suggestion of simply waiting for Kerry to leave his house. No officers or decision makers documented any suggestion of de-escalation, such as leaving the scene with only a couple officers to monitor the door. No officers or decision makers documented any suggestion of returning to the home at a later date to effectuate the arrest. No trained crisis intervention training officer was on scene to talk to Carey. And so you see at each turn that they did not value this man's life. They didn't value his life when they decided to not to leave and maybe try to come back later. They didn't value his life when they decided to throw the pepper spray canisters in there. They didn't value his life when they refused to let his family continue to speak to him. They didn't value his life when they didn't send when instead of sending a crisis trained officer on the scene, they sent Matthew Krantz, who was coming into the scene like he was Iron Man. At approximately 7:51 p.m., and again, there's no hostages in the home. There has been nobody assaulted or anybody hurt. There's no arrest warrant. The only thing that is happening is a man is having a mental health crisis in his home. At approximately 7:51 p.m., defendant, City of Rockford officers observed that Carey was carrying a stick or rod of some kind and threatening to defend himself if police entered his home. Despite his obvious mental illness, confusion, and intent to resist, at approximately 10:01 p.m., the front door was breached. Defendant Matthew Krantz was positioned at the back of the house, prepared to breach the back door. Defendant Matthew Krantz was equipped with full SWAT gear, a riot shield, a riot helmet, and his personally owned Glock 23. Defendant Matthew Krantz was positioned alongside Detective James Gully, who was armed with the less lethal shotgun, armed with beanbag rounds. And so again, that is another clear instance of this man's life not being valued. One officer went in with a less lethal shotgun in an attempt to not kill him, or to at least try to not kill him, to be less likely to kill him. While the other officer, he didn't even go in with his service weapon. He went in with his own personal gun. Defendant Matthew Krantz and Detective James Gully were advised that Carey was holding his front door shut to prohibit officers from entering the front door. In response, Detective Gully and Defendant Matthew Krantz breached the back door to take advantage of the opportunity wherein Carey was preoccupied with officers at the front door. And so again there, they show more of a determination or more creative tactics when it was time to try to take this man's life than they implemented when it was time to try to preserve this man's life. Detective Gully and Defendant Matthew Krantz breached the back door without Carey noticing and were able to sneak into the house. Despite the fact that Detective Gully was the officer carrying non-lethal weaponry, Defendant Matthew Krantz was in front of Detective Gully and was carrying his personally owned Glock 23 pistol. Defendant Matthew Krantz was, quote, lethal cover for Detective Gully, who was carrying the less lethal shotgun. So the person with the gun that's going to kill you in the front. What? Okay. When Detective Gully and Defendant Matthew Krantz entered the back of the house, they noticed a blanket had been erected between the back of the house and the front room where Carey was holding the front door closed. Defendant Matthew Krantz was, quote, only lethal cover for Detective Gully, but Defendant Matthew Krantz nonetheless took the lead and moved the blanket out of the way in order to access the front room where Carey was holding the front door closed. Defendant Matthew Krantz had essentially closed off the possibility of using the less lethal shotgun to incapacitate Carey because Defendant Matthew Krantz was in the line of Detective Gully's fire and was the first to breach the blanket, blocking the view of the front room. Defendant Matthew Krantz's actions were contrary to proper police procedure and rendered the use of non-lethal weapons impossible. After Defendant Matthew Krantz moved the blanket out of the way, Defendant Matthew Krantz observed Carey preoccupied with officers at the front door. After observing Carey with his back turned, Defendant Matthew Krantz made no efforts to use non-lethal force to incapacitate Carey. Instead, Carey eventually noticed the presence of Defendant Matthew Krantz and turned to face him. Despite being fully equipped with riot gear from head to toe, including a shield to protect from blunt instruments, and despite having multiple officers by his side for support, and despite Carey's lack of firearms, Defendant Matthew Krantz shot Carey 4 times, including 1 bullet to the head. Defendant Matthew Krantz shot Carey from a distance of at least 3 feet. defendant Matthew Krantz did not observe Carey point a firearm at defendant Krantz or Detective Gully. Carey did not immediately die due to the multiple gunshot wounds. During this time, he experienced pain and suffering. After Carey was shot by 4 bullets, a defendant City of Rockford officer began handcuffing Carey instead of attempting to render any medical aid. Denzel Duvant got beat while he was handcuffed. Faustin Guaitigo got shot and murdered and then handcuffed. Jose Gonzalez. Jose Gonzalez was shot while he was running away. I doubt that after they shot him, they didn't handcuff him as he laid on the ground too. And as we just went through in this, Mark Barmore unarmed shot while laying on the ground and then handcuffed. Philip, they didn't name I would assume after they shot Philip Johnson, they handcuffed Philip Johnson. And again, they go through when they speak about shooting Carey Blake, and then after shooting this man 4 times, including once in the head, they shot this man 4 times and once in the head, and then they handcuffed him after they did it. So don't ask nobody why people saying Black Lives Matter. Because in Rockford, Illinois, it's clear based on the few, these are just some of the few instances that we're stating that if you're black, your life does not matter. If you're black, your life is devalued. Or else after they shot you, they would try to help you or render first aid. No, they shoot you, then they handcuff you. I can't read no more of them. Can't read no more of those. We done reading those. I can't read no more of those. All right, we go through the dates one more time. We go through the dates. Mark Barmore, murdered August 24th, 2009 by the Rockford Police Department. The officers were found justified and went back to work. Michael Sago Jr., murdered October 1st, 2011 by the Winnebago County Sheriff Deputy. The Winnebago County Sheriff Deputy was found justified and went back to work. Philip Johnson, murdered January 28th, 2012. Logan Bell, murdered October 11th, 2012. Demetrius Bennett, murdered November 1st, 2012. All 3 of those incidents that took place in 2012, all the officers were found justified and all the officers went right on back to work. Eddie Patterson, killed November 5th, 2017. That killing was found to be justified. The Eddie Patterson case is one that's more known because it was Jamie Cox also died in that incident. And it was said that if Carey Blake would have survived after being shot, that not only would he have been justified in being shot, but he would have stood trial for Jamie Cox, the death of Jamie Cox. The devaluation of black life. Carey Blake, the person that we just read, murdered December 30th, 2018 inside of his home. That shooting was found justified. Matthew Krantz went right on back to work to ride on in tanks like he was Iron Man and go to people's homes. Eugene Washington, died October 28th, 2019 in the Winnebago County Jail. Nobody was held accountable. There was no reprimand or no responsibility for the people who allowed this man to die in the jail. If that all right. Joseph McCormick died December 1st, 2019. Same thing, inside the Winnebago County Jail. His family was told that he committed suicide, even though inside the jail they're supposed to take everything from you so you can't commit suicide. It's supposed to be correctional officers that go by and check the cells on a regular period to make sure you can't commit suicide, but somehow this man found a way to commit suicide. The same thing for Geno Washington. It's supposed to be a CO who go through the cells and check the cells on a regular basis to make sure everybody is alive and well, because once you go inside the jail, it is their responsibility to keep the inmates in there alive. But because they don't value those people's lives, they don't care about keeping them alive. They feed them filth that lead to them being dead. That will lead to a quick death. the culture and of the society in the jail is not one that's conducive to a long, healthy life. And so it's not a surprise that the people who are put there to run it or to be in charge of it don't care about the lives of the people that's inside of there, when at every turn they're being told that no one else cares about the lives of the people inside of there. Mikey Guzman, who was ran down August 23rd, 2020 by a South Beloit police officer. That South Beloit police officer went right on back to work to put other more pedestrians at risk. No consequence, no reprimand. Again, and all of these people, these officers who have done these things, they go on paid leave. They sit on paid leave. Officer Matthew Krantz, who shot Kerry Blake 4 times while he was unarmed, who shot Kerry Blake in his head and then handcuffed him while they try to decide whether the shooting was justified, he sat and got a paid leave. And again, multiple of these cases in here, there have been civil lawsuits in which the city of Rockford have paid out settlements to the family. And so as a taxpayer, you pay for the money for the paid leave for the officer that did the killing. And then as a taxpayer, you pay for the money to get given out to the family of this person who was killed by the police. And then 80% of the police that work in the Rockford Police Department live outside the Rockford Police Department. So when it's time for them to pay taxes, their money don't even go back into that pot that's getting divvied up to these people's families. It go to Rochelle, or it go to Rockton, or it go to Belvedere, or it go to Winnebago. Tyrus Jones shot October 2nd, 2020 while unarmed and while running away. Justified, and the officer who shot him was sent to go right back to work. And again, this is the handiwork of the officer who shot him. The officer shot Tyrus Jones October 2nd, 2020, and then January 5th, 2021, he was involved in this taking place to Denzel Duvant. While handcuffed. This is not a picture of something that happened to a man that had a weapon, or a man who was running away, or a man that posed some type of imminent threat. This was done to a man who was handcuffed. You can see in the picture that he's still bleeding in the mugshot. Handcuffed. This is the work of the Rockford Police Department. This didn't happen in Ferguson. This didn't happen in LA. This didn't happen in 1995 or in 2000 or in 2005. This happened January 5th, 2021. This young man was assaulted and beat while he was handcuffed, and one of the officers involved in it shot an unarmed black man 2 months earlier while he was running away. Both times he said he saw a gun. No gun. This man had no gun, no weapon. 2021, Faustin Guaitigo, murdered by the Winnebago County Sheriff deputies inside his home. Again, this happened April 10th, 2021. Not 2020, not 2005, 2009, not 1995, 2021, murdered inside his home. Because they did not value this man's life, because they did not value trying to de-escalate the situation, because they went inside into this man's home like a hit squad. And then again, the same, just like we spoke with the last 2 people, after they shot this man multiple times, the last bullet went inside this man as he laid on the ground, and then they handcuffed him and told him to stop resisting arrest. As he laid there dying, they told this man to stop resisting arrest. Faustin Guaitigo, April 10th, 2021. And then the most recent victim of police terrorism that we know of in Rockford, Illinois, because again, these are just the notable things. This is Jose Gonzalez Jr. 19-year-old young man, 19-year-old, shot while running away. Not shot while trying to take the officer's gun, not shot assaulting the officer, not shot doing a kidnapping or some type of hostage situation. Shot while running away. Nobody's life was in danger. There was no threat. The only thing that was in danger was this officer not getting his person. And since the Rockford Police Department and since law enforcement in this city have been told that they can get their man dead or alive, that's what they did. When Tyrus Jones was shot in October 2nd, 2020 while running away, and it was found to be justified, it gave the okay to every other police officer to shoot people while running away, and this is the next victim of it. And so the question becomes, The question becomes, especially if you are a black or brown member of this community, especially if you have family and friends that are black and brown members of this community, is this going to be your family member next? Because the officers who did this are still on the streets. The officers who did this were not told they did something wrong. The officers who did this were not reprimanded. Will this be you next? Will this be your brother? Will this be your cousin? Or maybe Faustin Guaitigo. Maybe you won't be lucky enough to survive, or your loved one won't be lucky enough to survive. So again, do a rundown. Food Truck Tuesdays, the May 30th Alliance will be here every Tuesday. We can continue to be here every Tuesday. We have the history of the Winnebago Boone Integrity Task Force pamphlets down here. Anybody that wants one, we keep a couple copies. Please come out and get some. May 21st, we will be at City Market at the first City Market protest. We are currently participating in the occupation outside of City Hall. It's members of the May 30th Alliance that are there right now. We got members of the May 30th Alliance that are moving around down here. And again, for anybody who may be unaware, the objective of us as an organization is to raise awareness to these issues, because for far too long in the city of Rockford, Illinois, in the county of Winnebago, people feel as if these issues don't happen here. They feel as if this is a problem in general. Police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice is a problem in general in America, but nobody speaks about how it is a problem in particular and specifically in Rockford, Illinois. Down at City Hall, we have 15 memorials up of people who have been killed by the Rockford Police Department or died in the custody of the Rockford Police Department or the Winnebago County Sheriff's deputies, and then one young man who was killed by the Metro Enforcement Agency inside of Rockford, Illinois. And so we have to get past the place of just putting Black Lives Matter signs up. We have to get past the place of having arguments on Facebook, and we have to start doing the work of informing people that these things are taking place. Not that these things happened 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 20 years ago, but that these things are happening currently. Faustin Guaitigo was murdered April 10th, 2021. The case is currently under investigation. Jose Gonzalez Jr. was shot while running away April 11th, 2021. That is currently under investigation. There's a dash camera video somewhere of the young man Tyrus Jones being shot as he was running away. And again, we have gotten to the place where we are spending more time thinking about the actions of the victim and not spending enough time talking about the actions of the person perpetuating the violence. Anytime a police officer is involved in a situation, it is going to be some type of crime taking place. It's not going to be a situation in which these people who are going to be victimized are not going to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, or not going to be the perfect victims. We have to get past that. We have to start valuing everybody's life as if they were our brother, as if they were our sister, or as if they were our cousin, or as if they were our friend or our neighbor, because it is somebody's friend, it is somebody's neighbor, it is somebody's brother and sister. Tyrus Jones was somebody's son. Mikey Guzman was somebody's son. Philip Johnson was somebody's son. Joseph McCormick, Eugene Washington, Kerry Blake, Eddie Patterson, Mikey Sago Jr. All these people are somebody's son, are somebody's family members that they care about. And so we have to get past the place of, well, this person ran, they shouldn't have ran, so it's okay to murder them. If each one of us, if every person who ever ran from the police got shot by the police, the human population would decrease 50% overnight. And so running from the police is not a justification for being murdered by the police. Not complying with the police is not a justification for being murdered by the police, because if you get arrested for not complying with the police, the sentence that's handed down is not the electric chair. If you get arrested for running from the police, the sentence that's handed down is not the gas chamber. If you get arrested for arguing with the police or not turning yourself in for a warrant, the penalty for those things is not a firing squad. And so we have to stop being in a place in which we are trying to find reasons to justify state-sanctioned violence. And we have to start getting to a place where violence is not the answer to violence. When somebody makes a threat of violence, we don't send workers of violence to usurp their violence. Damn, what time is it? Damn.
I think I met you guys yesterday or something, or a while
Again,
back.
this is Denzel Duvant. Denzel Duvant, Rockford, Illinois, 2021, January 5th. Faustin Guaitigo. Faustin Guaitigo, murdered April 10th, 2021. Jose Gonzalez Jr., shot April 11th, 2021. I think the phone for me. I'm gonna end this live. The phone getting kind of low. I'm gonna end this live and we might do another. We might start another one up. I don't know. I'm gonna end this live. All right, we outside.